Hello and welcome to Let's Talk, a series of podcasts produced by the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation on the issues that matter to us and the issues that we know matter to you too. Prevention, research, treatment, and recovery support. I'm your host, William Moyers, and today we come to you from the vaunted stage of the Bigelow Auditorium at Hazel and Betty Ford's facility in Center City, Minnesota. This is historic place where over the decades, at least since 1970, people have stood on this stage and shared their own experience, strength, and hope. Today, we have three young people to share their own experiences and their journeys in recovery. We have Nina, Holly, and Mike. Welcome to the three of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nina, tell me just a little bit about what it means to be a nurse in addiction and a nurse in recovery.
It means a lot. At first it was really tough I felt like I was very alone in being a nurse in recovery. I came to find out that I was very much not alone. There's AA, NA groups, there was tons of counselors here who had been through similar situations as me, making me feel so much more part of a group and really taking away that factor of shame that I struggled with a whole bunch at the beginning. So now for me, being a nurse in recovery, right now is just about education and trying to help support people who are going through the same thing in the beginning stages of a really tough time in their life and making a lot of changes and trying to better themselves.
Mike, you were at Notre Dame, student athlete at Notre Dame. What happened?
Well, after my junior year, I ended up having a total of 4 hip surgeries and 2 core surgeries. And in that time, I withdrew from school and went down a pretty dark path and became heavily addicted and dependent upon the opiates that I was prescribed, and which just led to an overall addiction to painkillers and opiates that I could get my hands on. And if it weren't for the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation and me seeking treatment here 18 months ago, to the day, tomorrow, I truly do not know if I would be alive today. And that sounds harsh, but it's the truth.
A lot of times the public perception is that young people are addicted to, quote, hard drugs or they're smoking too much weed, and we forget that alcohol is a drug just like any other drug in terms of how its impact can turn somebody's life upside down. Holly, that was your experience, correct?
Yeah, it was. I grew up with a dad who was in active addiction. His substance was alcohol. When I went to college, I had drank throughout high school, but I had sports, and so those sports were my main priority. I also played a sport, or I ran track in college. My freshman year, I was prescribed Adderall, and then my junior year, I was the captain of the track team. I was getting the majority of my school paid for, and I quit and left to be in an unhealthy relationship that I was in, and moved to Oklahoma. Oh yeah, I know, right? Yeah, and I really thought that was the next best thing. So that my addiction was playing out in relationships as well, and so after dropping out of school twice, because I had to take incompletes. I mean, I was failing time after time. At my classes, I couldn't keep it together. My anxiety, just my mental health had totally depleted. And I was also in a really dark place where I knew I had 2 decisions. You know, I could get help or I can die. And I've talked with you guys a little bit, as my dad did pass away almost 2 years ago from addiction, and so that put in front of me the decision I had to make.
That was your bottom.
Yeah.
Nina, what was your bottom that caused you to make that turn from being addicted to seeking help?
For me, I think I had a couple different bottoms. It was realizing, which all ended up being, I guess, one big one, which was realizing my constant and only thought was like when and where to get the next, pill to take, the next high to get to, but also realizing I had an incredible dependence. So the same amount that, just the obsession around that. And then once getting, the drugs the way I wasn't working, I started stealing from the hospital I was working at and got caught doing it. And that, I wanted to be a nurse my entire life, and I worked really hard through high school and college and got that, achieved that goal, and it was being taken away from me by, essentially this addiction that had taken over my entire life. So I think the phone call from the DEA and no longer having my nursing license suspended were definitely my ultimate rock bottom.
Mike, you have shared with me that your bottom required you to come to treatment at the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation, but you have aspirations to go back to school.
I do.
How are you going to do that as a person in recovery?
Well, I wouldn't call it nervous. I believe, over the past 18 months, I've really been able to practice myself in recovery, and also practice studying and being a student again.
Yeah.
The last 2 semesters, I've done 2 semesters at Concordia. And, that's really been beneficial. I'm very active in the recovery community. And I mean, there's no bigger recovery community than what you find in the Twin Cities area.
Right.
And so over the course of the last 18 months, I've been able to practice those character traits. So when I go back and I kind of open those old wounds, if you would, I'm not blindsided by extreme emotions and whatnot. And so, in other words, I'm confident in myself to go back because I have a goal in mind to go finish my degree and finish what I started there. And and I have faith in myself. I have faith in God, and my relationship with God has also played an incredibly essential part in my recovery. And
we all need a higher power, whether that's something up above or community or nature, yoga, whatever it is. We all got to find something that's greater than us if we want to overcome this. Holly, you've gone back to school as a young woman, as a student in recovery. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, I could really relate to what you said about opening up old wounds, per se. I was really nervous to go back to Mankato, as that's kind of where I really spiraled down. And I went there with a different perspective of gratitude. And I was just, with the open wounds that I did have, I was actually able to speak to the people who I, needed to close that door. And it's been awesome. I mean, I had to drive back to Mankato 3 days a week to finish one 50-minute class.
That's a long drive every day.
It's a long drive every day. And I definitely couldn't have done that had I not been in recovery, right? I had 2 classes to finish the last 3 years of my life, and I had a really hard time getting it done. And so to be done and to not have to have this fear of like failing again and again, I just have this like new sense of like gratification, and it makes me want to help others who are going back to school and be like, it is possible. It's actually 10 times better being sober and, without all the distractions.
We know there are many pathways to recovery. We all walk that pathway that works best for us. Nina, you've been open about the fact that you use medication to support your recovery. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I was, when I came to Center City Hazelden, I went through the detox part of it, and there they explained what Suboxone was, and the doctor and I and my counselor decided that would be a good path for me. So since then, I've been on a taper program for something called Suboxone, which just helps support the cravings and just helps support my recovery as a whole, because I think it's really hard to go from the treatment kind of bubble to real life bubble, because you're entirely, it's intimidating to relearn your life as someone in recovery, and it's really helped me kind of bridge that gap and really build my support system and really build my life back up and continue the taper process through the DEA, through house arrest, through having a baby, like all of those things. It's just helped me immensely.
You're a new mom.
I am.
And you couldn't be a new mom like you are
No,
without your recovery.
No, not at all.
Remarkable. Congratulations.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Boy or girl?
Boy.
Name?
Grayson.
You're a fine example already to Grayson
Thank
of
you.
what recovery is.
Thank you.
And what about you, Mike? What has recovery meant to you? How do you recover?
Recovery has meant everything to me. You know, Nina touched base on a little something about her identity and rebuilding her identity. And I've had a very similar experience. I mean, when football ended for me, I realized I had no idea who I was beyond Mike, and I'm on the football team. And so over the course of, since I've been sober and been in my recovery, I've learned to not only know myself, but I've learned to have love for myself, and that's allowed me to love others. And and at the beginning of this process, I realized still when I was wrestling with the not knowing of kind of who I was, I did know that I had a big problem in my life, and that was drugs and alcohol. And I realized that with the change I needed, I couldn't do that alone. And yeah, it wasn't like I just needed to be straightened out. It was like I was walking that way and needed to be walking that way. And in order to do that, as much as I tried myself, doing it alone and without having people to lean on and kind of guide you would not have been possible. So.
And you all found recovery very early in your lives. The reality is that as you go through life, you're likely to experience it on life's terms, which can be lots of highs and lots of lows. I know that from my own experience. Holly, you shared the fact that you lost your father to this illness, and yet here you are walking your walk. What about adversity? How have you managed to turn adversity into the opportunities, and what do you want to do with that opportunity?
Yeah, so 4 months after my dad passed is when I came to Hazelden, still very broken, obviously, and going through a lot of grief. And I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else than here to be grieving at that time. But I also learned, a big thing that I've learned in recovery is changing perspective, seeing half glass full instead of half glass empty. And for me, that shifted my thought process on my dad dying. Instead of this happened to me, this happened for me. His passing gave me recovery. He's at peace, and now I have this gift to share with others. And so I'm starting an internship at St. Paul Sober Living next month, and I really look forward to educating people on addiction, sharing stories, and just helping as many people as I can get the resources that they need.
What a gift to be able to give it back, and to do so at a young age. All of you are doing that. We only have about a minute or so left, and I will just start at the other end there. I know from these Let's Talk podcasts have become a huge resource for people out in the world of wherever they're watching them, the last year or so that we've been doing them. So a lot of people are going to be watching this one. Some of them are going to be struggling. I want to ask each of you what your message is as we prepare to wrap it up to those who might be listening or watching and are struggling. Nina, what's your message to those people?
What do you have to lose at this point? I know how scary that step can be, and it's just it's so intimidating. But I have found so much community in this community. It's just it's from professionals to peers to just the amount of support that's here. There's no way you won't find someone with a similar or almost same story as you that you can relate to, that's in recovery and that's also at the place that you are. And that was so huge for me, learning that I wasn't alone, I wasn't crazy, I wasn't a bad person, and all of those things are so true for anyone who's struggling. It's not who you are, and you need to, the best thing you can do for yourself is get help, and it's one of the strongest things you can do.
Thank you.
So,
Holly?
Yeah, I just asking for help. I think and taking your instincts seriously. If you really are asking yourself, about, is this, I don't think this is normal, the way I'm drinking. Look into it, ask for help. There's so many resources online now. And it is a gift to feel free from shame, to step outside of shame, to recognize it, and then leave it in the past, because we are good people. Yes. And you deserve a happy life, joyous and free. So
thank you, Holly.
Yeah.
Mike, you get the last word, man.
I would say, a lot of what these two just touched on. Don't be ashamed. Don't be ashamed of who you are, or anything that you that is maybe causing you to struggle. I almost want to say it's okay to have a problem, but what's not okay is just to ignore and act like it's not there, because there are so many options today. Like, we heard incredible options today from the people sitting up here on the panel. And just believing that there's new life for you. There's a chance. The recovery is possible. And
Thank you. All three of you proving that recovery is possible, not only by living the lives that you're living, but by your willingness to be part of this Let's Talk podcast today. Mike, thank you for being here. And Holly, thank you. And Nina, thanks to all of you, not just for your recovery, but for your strength and your conviction to share it. I'm your host, William Moyers, and hope you've enjoyed this latest edition of Let's Talk, a series of podcasts on the issues that matter to us at Hazel and Betty Ford and matter to you too. Please join us again. Thank you.